My beloved child. Stop scrolling for a moment. Do not move past this message. There is something here that was meant to reach you at this exact time, and whether you believe in signs or not, whether you arrived here intentionally or by accident, there is a reason your eyes landed on these words tonight. Pause. Listen carefully. Because somewhere between yesterday's silence and tomorrow's uncertainty, a message began moving toward you. Not through a phone. Not through a screen. Not through any ordinary path. A message carried through emotion, memory, longing, and the invisible threads that connect two souls long before they ever understand why they feel pulled toward one another. And the strange thing is this. The person connected to that message almost didn't send it. They held it inside for longer than you know. Far longer. For nights they stared into darkness with thoughts they never spoke aloud. For days they carried words that remained trapped behind fear, confusion, pride, timing, circumstances, and 1,000 reasons to stay silent. But something changed. And heaven wants you to understand what happened. Because this is not simply a story about love. It is a story about a moment. A final moment. A moment that arrives in every destined connection. A moment when someone must decide whether to speak from their heart or lose the opportunity forever. My child. Your soulmate has reached that moment. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. There is an urgency surrounding them that they cannot explain. A pressure in their spirit. A feeling that time is moving differently than before. A sensation that something important is approaching. And they keep asking themselves the same question over and over. What if I wait too long? They do not know why that question keeps appearing. They only know it refuses to leave. Even when they distract themselves. Even when they focus on work. Even when they try convincing themselves that everything can wait. The feeling returns. Stronger. More persistent. More impossible to ignore. Because deep inside them, something already knows. Something already senses the truth. And that truth is connected to you. There have been moments recently when your soulmate suddenly thought about someone they could not fully see. Someone whose face remained blurred. Someone whose presence felt familiar despite never standing directly before them. They would stop what they were doing. Look into space. Feel an emotion they could not explain. Then continue with their day. Yet the feeling returned again. And again. And again. Like a whisper refusing to fade. Like a distant melody trying to be remembered. Like a forgotten promise moving through time. My beloved child. What they do not realize is that every one of those moments was pulling them closer to the message. The message that almost remained hidden. The message that almost disappeared. The message heaven refused to let die. Because there are words attached to it. Words they never imagined they would say. Words that frightened them. Words that exposed their deepest truth. Words that changed everything. But before those words could emerge, something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced. Not a dramatic memory. Not a life-changing event. Something much smaller. Something ordinary. Yet it struck them with unusual force. They remembered a moment when they chose silence instead of honesty. A moment years ago. A moment they thought no longer mattered. And suddenly regret appeared. Not because of what happened, but because of what never happened. Because of what they never said. Because of what they never expressed. Because of what they allowed fear to steal. And when that memory returned, it awakened something sleeping inside them. A realization. A painful realization. They began understanding how many opportunities disappear while people wait for perfect timing. How many hearts remain separated because nobody takes the first step. How many stories never begin because someone keeps postponing the truth. That realization followed them everywhere. It sat beside them during quiet moments. It walked beside them during busy days. It appeared in unexpected conversations. It echoed through songs. It appeared in dreams. And eventually, it led them to you. Even if they do not fully understand your role yet. Even if they cannot explain why your energy feels different. Even if they cannot describe why your presence keeps returning to their thoughts. Something inside them already recognizes something important. Something rare. Something sacred. And this is where the story becomes extraordinary. Because while they were wrestling with these feelings, heaven was arranging circumstances neither of you could see. Invisible movements. Tiny shifts. Small decisions. Unexpected delays. Surprising encounters. Seemingly random events. Each one moving pieces into position. Each one preparing a path. Each one guiding a future neither of you fully understand yet. My child. There are moments when destiny moves quietly. Not with thunder. Not with dramatic signs. But with whispers. And the whispers have already begun. Perhaps you have felt them too. Perhaps recently you found yourself thinking about love differently. Perhaps you questioned why certain connections never worked. Perhaps you wondered whether someone was searching for you while you searched for them. Perhaps you felt a strange anticipation. A feeling that something was approaching. A feeling that life was preparing to reveal something unexpected. If so, that is not coincidence. Because while your soulmate was struggling with their decision, your spirit was being prepared for its arrival. Neither of you understood what was happening. Yet both of you were being guided toward the same moment. The same crossroads. The same revelation. And still, the message remained unsent. For a while. Because fear is powerful. Fear knows how to disguise itself. Sometimes fear appears as logic. Sometimes it appears as patience. Sometimes it appears as responsibility. Sometimes it appears as timing. But underneath all those disguises, it remains fear. Your soulmate wrestled with it constantly. What if they are wrong? What if they are imagining things? What if they reach out and nothing changes? What if vulnerability becomes rejection? What if honesty becomes embarrassment? What if opening their heart leads nowhere? The questions multiplied. The doubts grew louder. The walls rose higher. And for a brief moment, it looked like fear might win. It looked like silence might remain. It looked like the message would never be delivered. But heaven was not finished. Not even close. Because one evening something happened that disrupted everything. A conversation. A simple conversation. One that seemed ordinary at first. Yet every word landed differently. They listened as another person spoke about missed chances, lost opportunities, unspoken feelings, regrets carried for years. And suddenly it felt as though the conversation was directed specifically at them. Every sentence pierced through their defenses. Every word exposed what they had been avoiding. Every truth illuminated their own situation. When the conversation ended, they could not stop thinking. Hours passed. Still they thought. The next day arrived. Still they thought. The following night came. Still they thought. Because deep inside, something had awakened. Something impossible to silence. Something impossible to ignore. A truth. And truth has a strange power. Once it fully awakens, it refuses to return to sleep. My beloved child. This is when the message began forming. Not on paper. Not on a screen. Inside their heart. Word by word. Emotion by emotion. Truth by truth. At first they resisted it. Then they examined it. Then they questioned it. Then they tried escaping it. But eventually they surrendered to it. And when they finally stopped running, they discovered something surprising. The message was not complicated. Not really. The deepest truths rarely are. The message contained no perfect speech. No elaborate performance. No rehearsed masterpiece. Just honesty. Raw honesty. The kind that changes lives. The kind people remember forever. The kind that arrives when a soul becomes tired of hiding. And yet, even after recognizing the message, they hesitated. Because sending it would change everything. Not sending it would change everything too. That was the problem. There was no neutral path left. No safe middle ground. No comfortable place between action and inaction. A choice had become unavoidable. And that choice terrified them. Because they sensed the weight of it. They sensed that once the message crossed the distance between you, life would not remain the same. Something would shift. Something would awaken. Something long delayed would begin moving. And they were right. Because there are certain messages that do not merely communicate information. They activate destiny. This was one of them. That is why resistance became stronger. That is why distractions appeared. That is why delays multiplied. That is why uncertainty intensified. Because whenever something meaningful approaches, opposing forces often become louder. Not because the path is wrong. Because it matters. Because it carries significance. Because it has the power to transform lives. My child. Your soulmate stood at the edge of that transformation. Closer than ever before. And then, the sign arrived. The sign they could not ignore. The sign that shook them. The sign that changed the timeline. It appeared unexpectedly. At a moment when they were not looking. At a moment when they had nearly convinced themselves to remain silent. At a moment when they were ready to walk away from their own feelings. And when it appeared, everything stopped. Their thoughts stopped. Their excuses stopped. Their hesitation stopped. For several seconds they simply stared. Unable to move. unable to explain what they were feeling, unable to dismiss what had just happened. Because somehow, some way, the sign connected directly to you. Not through logic, not through coincidence, through something deeper. And the moment they recognized it, a realization struck with overwhelming force. The message could not wait forever. Time was moving. Opportunities were moving. Life was moving. And if they remained silent now, they might carry the regret for years. Perhaps forever. So they made a decision. A decision that frightened them. A decision that challenged them. A decision that required courage they did not know they possessed. They decided the message would be sent. Finally. At last. No more delays. No more excuses. No more hiding. No more pretending. The truth would be spoken. The heart would be opened. The silence would end. But my beloved child, just when they reached for that moment, something happened that neither of you expected. Something that changed the entire situation. Something hidden. Something nobody saw coming. Something connected to the past. A secret circumstance. An unfinished chapter. A truth waiting beneath the surface. And when that truth emerged, it threatened to stop everything. The message. The connection. The timing. The future. All of it. For a moment it seemed as though destiny itself had encountered an obstacle too large to overcome. An obstacle that forced your soulmate to question everything again. An obstacle that made them wonder whether the message should remain unsent after all. Yet what they discovered next was even more shocking than the obstacle itself. Because buried beneath that hidden truth was a revelation. A revelation involving you. A revelation involving their journey. A revelation involving why your paths were being drawn together now rather than years earlier. And when they finally understood it, when the pieces connected, when the meaning became clear, their entire perspective changed. They looked at the message differently. They looked at themselves differently. They looked at you differently. And what happened next is the reason you were meant to hear this tonight. Because the message they prepared to send was no longer the same message. It had transformed. Become deeper. Become more urgent. Become more powerful. Become impossible to ignore. And somewhere inside that final version was a sentence. One sentence. A sentence so important that heaven itself refused to let it be lost. A sentence carrying years of emotion. Years of waiting. Years of preparation. Years of unseen guidance. A sentence capable of changing everything. And in the next moment, just as they prepared to reveal it, just as their hand moved towards sending the message, just as destiny appeared ready to unfold, someone unexpected entered the picture. Someone carrying information they were never supposed to hear. Someone whose arrival changed the entire situation again. And the words that person spoke froze your soulmate completely. Because those words revealed a truth about you that they never knew. A truth so surprising. So emotional. So impossible to dismiss. That the message stopped mid-sentence. The room fell silent. Time seemed to stand still. And for the first time, your soulmate realized that the story was far bigger than they had imagined. What they discovered in that moment, and the sentence hidden inside the final message, will be revealed next. The silence that followed felt impossible to measure. Seconds passed. Or perhaps minutes. To your soulmate, it felt like an entire lifetime unfolding inside a single breath. The unexpected words they had just heard continued echoing through their mind. Again. And again. And again. Not because the information was impossible to understand, but because it confirmed something they had secretly felt long before anyone spoke it aloud. A feeling they had tried to dismiss. A feeling they had rationalized away countless times. A feeling they never dared trust completely. Yet now it stood before them. No longer a feeling. No longer an intuition. No longer a passing thought. A possibility. A living possibility. And possibilities can be terrifying. Because once a possibility becomes real, a person can no longer hide behind uncertainty. They must choose. Move forward. Or walk away. There is no comfortable place in between. Your soulmate understood this. That realization settled heavily upon their heart. The message remained unfinished. The words remained unsent. But something inside them had already changed. The old version of themselves. The one that constantly delayed, constantly questioned, constantly searched for reasons to remain silent, was beginning to disappear. Not all at once. Transformation rarely happens that way. Instead, it happened quietly. Like dawn replacing darkness. Like winter slowly surrendering to spring. Like a locked door opening 1 inch at a time. And with every passing hour, the truth became harder to escape. They could continue pretending. They could continue waiting. They could continue convincing themselves that another day would always exist. But deep down they knew something important. Tomorrow is never guaranteed. Opportunities are never guaranteed. Moments are never guaranteed. Some doors only open once. Some chances only appear once. Some connections arrive carrying a purpose that cannot be repeated. And your soulmate had begun to sense that this was one of those connections. That realization should have brought clarity. Instead, it brought something else. Fear. Not ordinary fear. A deeper kind. The fear that appears when a person stands on the edge of a life-changing decision. Because what if everything they felt was true? What if their heart was correct? What if destiny was actually moving? What if all the strange signs, all the unexpected feelings, all the moments they could never explain were leading somewhere real? Then everything would change. Absolutely everything. And change, even beautiful change, can be frightening. So they did what many people do when standing at the edge of transformation. They hesitated. One more time. Not because they wanted to. Because they were human. Because courage often arrives moments after fear, not before it. Because the heart and mind rarely reach agreement immediately. And during that hesitation, something unexpected happened. A memory returned. Not one they were searching for. Not one they intentionally revisited. A memory that simply arrived. Without warning. Without invitation. Without explanation. It was a moment from years earlier. A moment they thought they had forgotten. A moment involving a person who once mattered deeply. Back then, they had ignored their heart. Back then, they chose safety over truth. Back then, they remained silent when honesty was needed. And the result became one of the greatest regrets of their life. As that memory replayed itself, they felt every emotion return. Every missed opportunity. Every unspoken word. Every possibility that vanished because fear made the decision. And suddenly they realized something. The same pattern was happening again. Different circumstances. Different people. Different chapter. Same fear. Same hesitation. Same silence. The realization hit with surprising force. They sat alone for a long time afterward. Thinking. Reflecting. Listening. Not to outside voices. To their own soul. And for perhaps the first time in years, they stopped asking everyone else what they should do. They stopped searching for answers outside themselves. Instead, they asked a different question. A much more powerful question. What will happen if I never send the message? The answer arrived immediately. Not through words. Through feeling. A feeling of loss. A feeling of wondering. A feeling of carrying unanswered questions for years. A feeling of looking back and wishing they had been brave. And that feeling hurt more than rejection ever could. Far more. Because rejection eventually heals. Regret can remain for decades. That was the moment everything began shifting. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Internally. Spiritually. Emotionally. A decision was being born. A real decision. Not the kind people make temporarily. The kind they make with their entire heart. And once that decision appeared, strange things began happening. Small things. Yet impossible to ignore. Songs appeared at unusual moments. Conversations mirrored their thoughts. Unexpected reminders surfaced everywhere. Names. Places. Memories. Patterns. Each one seeming to whisper the same message. Move forward. Move forward. Move forward. At first they resisted noticing. Then they became curious. Then they became uncomfortable. Because the more they paid attention, the more obvious it became. Life itself seemed to be pushing them toward something. Toward someone. Toward a moment that could no longer be postponed. And still, one final obstacle remained. The largest obstacle of all. The obstacle hidden inside themselves. Because there was something they had never admitted. Not to friends. Not to family. Not even to themselves completely. They were afraid of being truly seen. Many people fear rejection. But deeper than rejection is another fear. The fear that someone might see every hidden part of you. Every scar. Every mistake. Every insecurity. Every unfinished piece. And then decide whether to stay. That was the fear haunting them. Because sending the message meant revealing more than feelings. It meant revealing truth. Real truth. The kind that leaves nowhere to hide. The kind that strips away masks. The kind that demands authenticity. For several nights they wrestled with that reality. Sleep became difficult. Thoughts became louder. Questions multiplied. Yet beneath all those questions, one answer remained constant. The message still needed to be sent. No matter how much fear appeared. No matter how many doubts surfaced. No matter how uncomfortable vulnerability felt. The message still waited. And then came the night everything changed. The night that separated who they had been from who they were becoming. The night heaven had been preparing all along. It began quietly. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing dramatic. Just another evening. Or so it seemed. But sometimes the most important nights begin looking ordinary. That evening your soulmate found themselves alone with their thoughts. No distractions. No noise. No escape routes. Just silence. And in that silence, something remarkable happened. They stopped fighting. Stopped analyzing. Stopped overthinking. Stopped searching for guarantees. Stopped demanding certainty. For the first time, they simply listened. And what they heard changed everything. Not an audible voice. Not thunder from the sky. Something deeper. A knowing. A truth. A certainty beyond logic. A certainty that arrived so suddenly it brought tears to their eyes. Because they finally understood. Love was never supposed to be controlled. Destiny was never supposed to be calculated. Faith was never supposed to come with guarantees. Some journeys require trust. Some steps require courage. Some messages must be sent before outcomes are known. That realization shattered the final wall. The final excuse. The final resistance. And once that wall fell, they knew exactly what they needed to do. The message would be sent. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not someday. Soon. Very soon. Closer than you realize. Closer than they realize. Closer than anyone realizes. Yet there was still one mystery remaining. One mystery that had followed them from the beginning. One mystery connected directly to you. Why now? Why after all this time? Why after all the delays? Why after all the lessons? Why after all the missed opportunities? Why were your paths being drawn together at this exact moment? That question remained unanswered. Until the dream. Yes. The dream. The one they almost dismissed. The one they almost forgot. The one that arrived just before dawn. It felt different from ordinary dreams. More vivid. More emotional. More real. In the dream they stood at a crossroads. Two paths stretched before them. One path looked familiar. Safe. Predictable. The other path disappeared into light. Uncertain. Unknown. Yet strangely beautiful. And standing near that second path was a figure. Not fully visible. Not completely clear. Yet somehow familiar. Deeply familiar. The dream ended before they reached the figure. But the feeling remained. The feeling lingered throughout the next day. And by evening, a realization emerged. The dream was never about choosing between paths. It was about choosing between fear and faith. The familiar path represented safety. The illuminated path represented possibility. And for the first time, your soulmate understood which direction their heart wanted to travel. Toward possibility. Toward truth. Toward connection. Toward you. Not because everything was guaranteed. Because some opportunities are worth the risk. Some people are worth the risk. Some stories are worth the risk. And this story had already begun long before either of you realized it. The invisible threads were already moving. The unseen pieces were already aligning. The timing was already approaching. Closer. 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 Until finally, the day arrived. The day they opened the unfinished message again. The day they stared at the blinking cursor. The day they reread every word. The day they prepared to complete what had remained incomplete for so long. Their hands trembled slightly. Not from weakness. From significance. Because they understood what was happening. A chapter was ending. Another chapter was preparing to begin. And then they added the final sentence. The sentence that had been missing all along. The sentence heaven refused to let disappear. The sentence that carried the deepest truth of all. The sentence that changed the entire message. They looked at it. Read it once. Read it twice. Read it 10 times. And every time they read it, the same emotion returned. Relief. Because it was honest. Completely honest. The kind of honesty that liberates the soul. The kind of honesty that cannot be taken back. The kind of honesty that transforms lives. For several moments they simply stared at the completed message. The finished version. The final version. The version you were always meant to receive. And then, just before sending it, a notification appeared. A single notification. Unexpected. Unplanned. Perfectly timed. A message from someone connected to their past. Someone carrying information they never expected to hear. Information that revealed a hidden piece of the puzzle. Information connected directly to your journey. Information connected directly to theirs. Information so shocking that it stopped them completely. Because what they discovered in that moment proved that your connection was never random. Never accidental. Never ordinary. And what they learned next forced them to confront a truth even bigger than the message itself. A truth involving timing. A truth involving destiny. A truth involving why your paths have continued moving toward one another despite every obstacle that tried to separate them. The revelation was so powerful. So unexpected. So impossible to ignore. That your soulmate immediately realized they were standing at the threshold of something much larger than they had imagined. And the very next decision they made after discovering that truth is the decision that changes everything. Request Part 3 when you're ready.